Okay, so have you ever wondered what makes some leaders like amazing at building consensus while others just like struggle?
Yeah. It's a fascinating question.
It really is. And today we're going to take a deep dive into the leadership style of someone you might not have heard of.
Oh, okay.
José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero,
Okay.
former Prime Minister of Spain.
Interesting.
And we're going to use this thing called the Enneagram.
Enneagram.
Yeah. To help us understand his approach to leadership,
Okay.
specifically the social 9 type.
Gotcha.
But don't worry.
Okay.
This isn't a deep dive into Spanish politics.
Okay.
It's more about how personality shapes leadership
Right.
and how we make decisions
Yeah,
and
yeah.
handle conflict.
Uh-huh.
What I think is really cool about Zapatero is how, like, his whole career, you can see the Enneagram,
Oh, wow.
especially the social 9 personality.
Really?
Like, woven through it.
Yeah.
It's not just his actions.
Right.
It's like the motivations behind them.
Interesting.
So it's almost like you have this, like,
uh-huh.
secret decoder ring
Yeah, I like that.
to figure out what makes someone tick.
I love that analogy, especially when we're talking about leaders.
Right. And one thing that's really interesting about him
Okay.
is how his early life really shaped his worldview.
Oh, okay, like what?
So imagine this.
Okay.
His grandfather was executed during the Spanish Civil War.
Wow.
Pretty intense.
Yeah, that's a profound experience.
I can't even imagine going through that.
It would be so easy to become bitter or resentful after something like that.
Right, like hardened.
Absolutely.
But for Zapatero, it was almost the opposite.
Really?
Yeah. Instead of all that anger, it gave him this, like, really strong desire for peace,
Interesting.
reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
This is something you see a lot with 9s.
Oh, okay.
They just, like, yearn for harmony.
Right.
They don't like conflict.
Yeah, makes sense.
And this really set the stage for, like, his whole approach to leadership.
Interesting.
So instead of becoming more, like, confrontational,
Yeah.
he was drawn to finding common ground.
Wow. That's like the opposite of what you'd expect.
Right. And it makes the next part of his story really interesting.
Okay.
So he becomes opposition leader.
Okay.
And he puzzles everyone with this approach he calls tranquila opposition.
Tranquila opposition. What is that?
Calm opposition.
Calm opposition. That sounds like a contradiction in terms, especially in politics.
Right.
I mean, politics is all about, like, fiery speeches and heated debates,
Right?
trying to, like, outmaneuver your opponent.
Totally.
But Zapatero is doing something totally different.
So instead of trying to score points
Uh-huh.
and, like, tear the other side down,
Yeah.
he was really trying to find ways to work together.
That's pretty remarkable.
Right. It's not exactly the usual political playbook.
You're telling me, I mean, that really highlights his social 9 personality.
It really does.
He wasn't playing games. It was genuine.
Yeah.
He genuinely disliked conflict and believed in finding unity.
Even when there were disagreements.
Exactly.
So do you have an example of what this tranquila opposition actually looked like?
Oh, absolutely. One of the clearest examples was his stance on counterterrorism efforts.
Okay.
So even though people criticized him
For
for
what?
being too soft, he cooperated with the governing party on this.
Really?
He thought national security was, like, above politics.
Right.
So he put aside those political differences to find solutions that actually worked.
So even on something as sensitive as terrorism,
Yeah,
he still prioritized collaboration and finding that common ground.
exactly. It really shows you what kind of person he was.
Yeah, it does. So I'm guessing these social 9 traits became even more obvious when he became prime minister.
Oh, yeah. Becoming prime minister didn't change those core traits, it just amplified them. And one of the areas where that was most evident was his approach to consensus building.
Right, because being prime minister
Yeah,
has, like, a whole other set of challenges
it does.
when it comes to keeping everyone on the same page.
It really does.
So how did his personality show up in his governing style?
Well, first you have to understand that for a social 9, consensus is really important.
Right.
It's not just about politics for them. It's, like, fundamental to who they are.
Right.
They have this deep need to create harmony,
Yeah.
bring people together, not just to get stuff done, but because it feels right.
So it's like their internal compass or something.
Exactly. It's a core value. And We see this really clearly in Zapatero's leadership.
Okay.
Like one of his most ambitious projects
Yeah.
was the Alliance of Civilizations.
Oh, yeah, I think I've heard of that. Wasn't that like a response to the whole clash of civilizations idea?
Exactly. That was gaining traction after 9/11.
Right.
And it really shows how Zapatero's personality influenced his actions.
Oh, okay.
He wasn't just trying to smooth things over.
Okay.
He actually believed in dialogue.
Yeah.
Like, he thought it could build understanding, bridge those divides. Ambitious goal, for sure, but it really showed his values.
Yeah.
Especially that desire for harmony.
I can imagine that leading a country like Spain, with its own internal divisions, must have been tough for someone who's so focused on harmony.
Yeah.
Like, how did he handle that?
Well, that's what makes it even more interesting, because he didn't just focus on international stuff.
Okay.
He applied that same drive for harmony at home, too.
Interesting.
And one of the clearest examples of this is how he responded to the Madrid train bombings
Oh, wow.
in 2004.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just devastating.
It was a horrific attack.
Really shook the world.
It did.
So how did someone who dislikes conflict so much, like Zapatero,
Yeah.
respond to something like that?
His response was a classic example of how social nines react under pressure.
Okay, how so?
Well, instead of focusing on retaliation or, like, aggressive military action.
Right. He emphasized unity.
Okay.
He wanted a measured response.
Mm-hmm.
So he stayed true to his values, even when everyone wanted him to act quickly and decisively.
Wow. That's really fascinating. But I can also see how it would lead to criticism.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, people might see that as a sign of weakness,
They did. Some saw it as hesitation or a lack of leadership.
especially after such a horrible attack.
Right. But for him, it was about sticking to his principles and not doing anything that he thought would escalate things.
So it's almost like his personality was both his greatest strength and his weakness, depending on the situation.
It's true. His commitment to peace and harmony could be seen as strength, but also as a weakness when decisive action was needed.
Exactly. Which leads us to another big moment in his time as leader.
Okay.
The 2008 global economic crisis.
Ah, yes.
Which, if I remember correctly, hit Spain pretty hard.
It did. It had a devastating impact.
So how did a leader who's like wired for peace and harmony
Yeah.
deal with something as chaotic as like a global economic meltdown?
Well, that's where we see both the amazing potential and the potential downsides of a social nine leader.
Okay.
It's complicated.
Sounds like it.
And it really highlights the nuances of this personality type.
This is getting really interesting. I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
We are.
There's still so much to explore, like his workaholic tendencies,
Right.
his famous talenti approach to dialogue,
Yeah.
and how his personality shaped how he dealt with like global issues.
Absolutely.
Plus, we need to really dig into the social nine subtype.
We do. There's so much more to uncover.
Definitely. Stay with us because we'll be unpacking all of that and more when we come back. Welcome back.
Yeah.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about how Zapatero, as like a social nine, handled that whole 2008 economic crisis.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's like a lot to unpack there,
Yeah, there really is.
especially when you consider the social nine subtype.
Right.
So what makes the social nine subtype so unique?
Well, the social nine is super interesting. They combine that nine's desire for harmony
Okay.
with this like urge to connect with people
Right.
and make a positive impact. It's
Mhm.
not just about avoiding conflict.
Right.
They actually want to like contribute to the well-being of the group.
So they're not just sitting around hoping for a better world.
No, not at all. They're out there working to make it happen.
Okay.
And we see this with Zapatero.
How so?
Like his workaholic tendencies,
Okay, yeah.
his focus on social reforms,
Mhm.
and his constant push for dialogue and building consensus.
Right.
For social nines, action is a way to manage inner uncertainty
Mhm.
and find purpose by contributing to the group.
I see. What's interesting to me is that he seemed to balance that need for consensus
Yeah.
with the need to address these complex divisive issues.
Right.
How did he navigate that tension?
Well, take how he dealt with those regional tensions
Okay.
in Catalonia and the Basque Country. Those were situations where conflict could have easily blown up,
Right.
but he kept coming back to dialogue,
Okay.
trying to find common ground.
Right.
Maintaining group harmony isn't just like a preference for social nines.
Right.
It's a deep need.
I see. So it's like they're the glue that holds everything together.
Exactly. And that brings us to this word that became like synonymous with his leadership style.
Oh, okay. What word?
Talante.
Talante. Right. I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
It means like disposition or approach, I think.
Yeah, roughly.
But it seems like it meant something more for Zapatero.
It did. It wasn't just a word for him. It was a real commitment to dialogue, in inclusivity,
Right.
understanding, creating a space where different voices could be heard and where solutions could be found through collaboration rather than confrontation.
That makes sense. So it wasn't just a tactic. It was like part of his values.
Exactly. And you really saw that in his communication style. Remember how we talked about how 9s are generally pretty measured in how they speak?
Yeah.
They avoid like that inflammatory rhetoric.
Right.
They want to find common ground and build consensus.
Though they're more about building bridges than burning them.
That's a great way to put it.
Did that resonate with people, though?
Well, his speeches, they were known for being calm.
Okay.
They focused on unity,
Right.
collective progress,
Yeah.
and they always acknowledged multiple perspectives.
So a very social 9 approach.
Yeah, exactly. It might not grab headlines, but it can be really effective.
In what way?
For building trust and creating that sense of shared purpose.
Okay.
That's one of the strengths of the social 9 approach.
Yeah.
It's not flashy,
Okay.
but it gets things done.
Through collaboration and understanding.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about how his personality influenced his domestic policies, his response to the Madrid bombings, and his communication style. But what about the international stage?
Okay.
Did his aversion to conflict, his emphasis on harmony, did that shape his foreign policy too?
Oh, absolutely. You could say that his foreign policy was like a reflection of his worldview.
How so?
Well, think about one of his most important decisions.
Okay.
Withdrawing Spanish troops from Iraq.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big deal.
It was.
Especially back then. I mean,
Right.
that set him apart from a lot of other world leaders
It did.
who were really committed to the war.
Yeah.
But he saw it as a matter of principle.
Okay.
He thought the war was tragic, unnecessary.
Okay.
He believed Spain's resources could be better used elsewhere,
Like where?
promoting dialogue and diplomacy.
So for him, it was about choosing peace over war.
Exactly. It was a classic social 9 decision.
Wow. And this wasn't just like a one-time thing, right?
No, not at all. He was a big champion of multilateralism,
Okay.
peaceful conflict resolution. Throughout his time as leader,
Right.
he pushed the alliance of civilizations,
Okay.
strengthened ties with Latin America and the Arab world. He really believed in diplomacy.
So he was basically taking those same social 9 principles and applying them to like the whole world.
Exactly. He wanted to build bridges globally.
Just like he did at home.
Yeah, exactly.
But that approach probably wasn't always welcomed, was it?
It wasn't. But it shows something important about the social 9 personality.
What's that?
Take his relationship with George W. Bush,
Okay.
the U.S. president at the time.
Yeah, I remember.
It was pretty strained at first.
I can imagine.
They had, like, really different approaches to foreign policy.
Right, so they clashed.
They did, but even in that relationship,
Yeah.
you can see his social 9 tendencies.
Oh, okay. How so?
He stood his ground.
Even when Bush pressured him.
Even then. He really believed in dialogue and diplomacy.
Right.
Even when it put him at odds with someone as powerful as Bush.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
It is.
But I imagine some people thought he was too accommodating.
Oh, yeah, they did. They questioned whether he could really be effective.
Right.
They said he was too focused on harmony.
Okay.
That it stopped him from making the tough calls.
Interesting. And that criticism becomes especially relevant when we think about how he handled the economic crisis.
It does.
Because that tendency towards harmony, avoiding conflict,
Right.
it's not always the best strategy, is it?
It's not. Especially when you need to make fast decisions.
Right.
And maybe some unpopular ones, too.
Exactly. It seems like that's something we need to explore more.
Definitely.
And it looks like we're out of time for this part.
We are.
Don't worry.
No.
We'll dig into all that and more when we come back. So we've been talking about how Zapatero's personality, this social 9, really shaped his leadership.
Yeah.
And it's been fascinating to see how that desire for harmony played out.
It really has.
But we ended last time talking about how a leader who avoids conflict,
Right.
can they really be effective when they have to make tough decisions?
Right. Yeah.
Especially in a crisis.
Exactly. And that's where the 2008 economic crisis comes in.
Okay.
It really shows us both the good and the bad.
Of a social 9 in charge.
Yeah, exactly. Remember how social 9s, they're great with empathy and compassion?
Yeah.
But they can struggle with those tough choices.
Right. The ones that could cause conflict.
Exactly.
So their desire for peace, that's a good thing in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
But maybe not when you need to act quickly.
Yeah, sometimes you need to make a tough call.
Right. So how did Zapatero react to the crisis at first?
He was hesitant.
Okay.
Almost like he didn't want to admit how bad it was.
Right.
Maybe he thought it would just sort itself out.
Without having to take those drastic measures.
Yeah, like he was trying to keep things calm.
Even though things were pretty chaotic.
Exactly.
So he wanted to keep a sense of stability.
Yeah. 9s really value peace and balance.
Even if it means putting off hard choices.
Sometimes.
And I bet that social subtype made that tendency even stronger.
Oh, absolutely. Social 9s are all about keeping the group together.
Right. They hate anything that could, like, break that harmony.
Yeah, they do. He was really worried about the fallout.
Of having to impose those tough economic measures.
Exactly. It wasn't that he didn't know what to do.
Okay.
He just hated the idea of conflict.
And he wanted to preserve that sense of peace.
Yeah, even when things were really difficult.
Right.
It's something you see a lot with social 9s.
Especially when they're the ones in charge.
Definitely.
So it's like a leader who is compassionate, wants to create a good society.
Yeah.
But sometimes struggles to make the decisions to protect that society.
It's a paradox.
It is. So Zapatero's story, it's like a warning.
In a way.
It shows how the social 9, how they can be great leaders.
They can.
But there are also these potential downsides. So what can we learn from all this?
I think Zapatero's story shows us that there's no perfect way to lead.
Okay.
What works in one situation
Right.
might not work in another.
So self-awareness is key.
It really is. You have to know your strengths.
Yeah.
And your weaknesses.
And your blind spot.
Exactly. Especially when you have to make hard choices.
It's also a good reminder that leadership isn't about being perfect.
No.
It's about knowing who you are, embracing your strengths, and knowing how to deal with challenges.
Right. And sometimes that means doing things that make you uncomfortable.
Like making tough decisions.
Exactly. Even if they disrupt things.
And this applies to everyone, right?
Oh, absolutely. Not just social minds.
It's about knowing your personality.
Yeah.
And how that affects your leadership.
Right. And using that knowledge to be a better leader.
Right.
A more compassionate leader.
Exactly. So as we wrap up here, any advice on how people can, like, figure out their own style?
Well, there are personality frameworks out there, like the Enneagram.
Right.
They can help you figure out your motivations, your fears, your strengths, and how those might affect your decisions.
It's all about self-discovery, really.
It is. It's a journey.
Right.
It's not about putting yourself in a box.
Right.
It's about understanding yourself better.
As a leader.
Exactly.
So you can keep learning and growing.
Exactly. To make a positive impact.
And who knows, maybe this has inspired you?
I hope so.
To learn more about personality and leadership. There's a lot out there to explore.
Definitely.
So until next time, keep learning.
Yeah.
Keep growing.
Keep diving deep.
And we'll see you then.